Hello everyone, in this video we are going to talk about different approaches of rendering and generating content for web apps. There are several approaches, each of them is good for different cases, and it is important to apply the correct approach as it will influence the loading speed of the app on resource consumption and so on. I will reference to JavaScript frameworks to highlight some things. Mostly we'll stick on React and Next. So these approaches are client-side rendering, server-side rendering, static site generator, and incremental static regeneration. So let's start with CSR. CSR is implemented in well-known UI frameworks and libraries such as React, Vue, Angular, Svelte, and so on. Rendering is happening in the browser, and data requests, response data handling, DOM elements managing, it also happening in the browser. And let's see how this technique works. So then user opens the browser and then opens our web application. So it makes request to server. Actually, in the first time, HTML is empty, and then JavaScript just manages DOM elements and builds the document structure. Then JavaScript, for example, on mount hook or something similar, makes requests to our API, then API goes to database to fetch data, and then API responses, usually with JSON, to the client's app, and this JSON will be handled to show the list of some items on the list. What are pros and cons of this approach? So pros are, for example, resources, JavaScript and CSS. They are loaded only once on very first request, or by chunks if lazy loading was implemented, and then only data requests are made by client side and result can be cached. So the app itself also can be cached with the help of service workers, for example, as it implemented in PWA applications. And what about cons? The first load can take some time. It may be a reason for poor UX, and only the loader can be visible for a couple of seconds. The same problem is for search engines, and it may lead that the app will not be indexed well. Developers should pay attention to such metrics as first contentful paint, the time when requested content, for example, article or body, becomes visible, and this metric should be minimized. The size of JavaScript bundle that app needs grows because of third-party libraries, polyfills added to the JavaScript bundle, and you'll need to configure lazy loading, track imports, and implement tree shaking. So the next approaches I grouped to pre-rendering and frameworks that implement server-side rendering and other similar things. They are NextJS, Next, Angular Universal, Super or SvelteKit, and other ones. Of course, there are a bunch of alternative solutions. So this group of pre-rendering includes SSR, static site generator, and incremental static regenerator. And let's start with SSR first. The idea of SSR that server generates HTML on each request, and client received fulfilled page with all data needed. So the user makes request for the page, then server goes to API or directly to database, then fetches all necessary data for this page, and then it applies this data to the HTML and handles all the DOM elements to initialize this page, and this ready-to-use HTML document goes to the user, and then it just shown in the browser. So this approach makes the first rendering fast. JS bundle that needs to be sent to client is pretty small. Then time to first byte, this is TTFB metric, becomes higher. TTFB actually is the time between clicking a link and the first bit of content coming in. So this happens because the time that server consumes to fetch data may be high, especially when data lives in other services, and delay may happen here. And let's see how it can be implemented using frameworks. For NextJS, so you have to export async function get server-side props, and inside this function will fetch some necessary data from services or from database, and then this JSON file will go to props. Here, this prop named data, and it should have the same name here. And then this data will be added to the markup. For example, let's take this example as well. Here, data, we will map through all the items and put a link to the post, and then generated HTML will go directly to user. Previous same example is for Next. For Next, we have to use async data, and then also we making some requests to third-party service or another service, then it returns some data, and this data then is used in markup. Like for this example, we just loop through all the items in the array and just putting the link to each blog post. For Supper framework, we also have that kind of function, which is named here preload, and it also makes a request to like some JSON API and gets the data, and then this data goes to property. Here export let article means property, and then article will be used in markup to show this data. So let's move on, and the next approach is static site generator. This is almost similar to SSR, except that this part will happen on build time and not on request time. So let's compare both of these approaches. So for SSR, these all steps will happen on request, but for static site generator, these steps, like building all the pages, all the HTML files for each page, is made in build time. So we know all the URLs, all the articles we'll have to prepare, and we just loop through all the articles. Then we request data for each of these articles to form HTML, to build HTML, and then all these HTML files will be just saved separately. And then user requests some of the pages, server just grabs one of them and returns as a response. In this case, time to first byte is low as pages are generated already. Also FP, like first paint, the first time any pixel becomes visible to the user, and FCP, first contentful paint, the time when requested content becomes visible, is low, which is good. This approach is most recommended one, and it should be used whenever it's possible. It is good for blog posts, articles, question-answer pages, and it may be cached in CDN. And as I said, pages are generated at build time. So there are a couple of different techniques in Next.js. So it is possible to generate pages with or without data. Without data just means that page does not require any data to be fetched from third-party services or any other services or any other sources to pre-render page. And with data means that we need some data to fill the page to pre-render it. And let's see examples. For example, the page about does not require any data. We can just put all the necessary data here, all the necessary content for about page, and it will be pre-rendered as is. And example for with data case, it's like more interesting one. And here we have to use getStaticProps function. This function gets called at build time and lets you pass fetched data to the page's props on pre-render, like we making request to some service, it returns data, and this posts data will be used as a prop for component here, and this post will be used in markup. And as I said, that during server-side generation, we'll have to know all the URLs. To know all the URLs, we'll have to use special function. It named getStaticPath, and it makes request to, for example, post, to know the array of all the possible posts that should be pre-rendered. And according to the name, we are using ID here. All the URLs will be pre-rendered, and let's see what will be the output. As an output, we'll have the set of HTMLs for each article. So here we have 50 articles, and for each of them we have HTML file which is pre-generated. It is possible because we're using dynamic rows. It means that ID here is dynamic one, and we are using ID here to differentiate articles, and based on this ID we know how many articles we'll have to pre-generate using these get static paths, and during build time, next we'll just generate all the HTMLs for all the articles. To sum up server-side rendering and static site generation, I will just say that these are two approaches for pre-rendering, but generating happens in different lifecycle steps. Of course, you can create a hybrid NextJS app by using static generation for most pages and using server-side rendering for others. And let's see another interesting approach, which is called incremental static regeneration. This is kind of the same as static generation, but we have additional option here, which is revalidate, and it means that Next.js will just regenerate the page each 1 second, for example, to make it relevant and keep pages up to date. And it will prevent the pages in the background. In this video, we talked about different approaches of how we can pre-render pages or generate them. I hope you enjoyed it. See you later.